Yesterday, political commentator Paul Joseph Watson put out a tweet where he said under Facebook's new rules, you are actually allowed to incite violence and send death threats to him personally, both of which are actual crimes. And here's the thing. It's true. You can. When I first heard this story, I thought there's no way Facebook would ever create a provision that allowed you to commit a crime and actually incite violence. They did. But it's all actually confusing because technically you can't target Paul Joseph Watson, but because they specifically said in the press that Paul is a dangerous individual, you can. It's all very confusing. So here's what we're going to do. Let's break it down, and I'll start by going through what Paul actually asserts at his summit.news website, where he says, Facebook issues new policy saying it's acceptable to post death threats against me. Yes, really. In the post, he highlights this from their new community standards. Recently, they issued a clarification because people were complaining their new rules banning white nationalism and white supremacy were too vague. So Facebook says we're going to expand and break down what the rules actually are. And in it, they actually allow you to break the law. This is one of the scariest and most, alarming escalations in the culture war we've seen yet. Under no circumstances should any platform create an unless provision when saying you can't incite violence or send death threats. Those are crimes. There should be no exception to this, but they've actually made them. Here's what we see. In the story, Paul says, he highlights this post from Facebook, which reads, do not post threats that could lead to death and other forms of high severity violence of any targets where threat is defined as any of the following: statements of intent to commit high severity violence or calls for high severity violence, unless the target is an organization or individual covered in the dangerous individuals and organizations policy, or is described as having carried out violent crimes or sexual offenses wherein criminal predator status has been established by media reports, market knowledge of news events. This is the weirdest thing because basically they're saying you can. Now, what's specific about Paul Joseph Watson is this story from back in May. BuzzFeed News reported Facebook and Instagram are banning far-right influencers like Alex Jones, Paul Joseph Watson, Milo Yiannopoulos, and Laura Loomer. A Facebook spokesperson said they have always banned individuals or organizations that promote or engage in violence and hate regardless of ideology. That's absolutely not true because Farrakhan was on the platform for a long time, who's been engaging in this kind of rhetoric since the 80s. But what they say is individuals or organizations. What they go on to clarify is specifically dangerous individuals and organizations. The ban will affect both Facebook and Instagram, according to reports. The Facebook cited its policies against dangerous individuals and organizations. If that's what they're citing in reference to banning Paul Joseph Watson, then yes, they are saying you can actually incite violence against him. But this story is actually much bigger than that. Because what people seem to be not realizing is that when actually going through the rules, Facebook has just announced they will ban all Antifa, period. And it's actually much crazier than that because technically under their rules, you could ban the United States or anybody flying the American flag. So all they've really done is they've not clarified their rules. They've made them even harder to understand and actually said, by all means, Facebook allows you to commit crimes. It's really weird. It's actually kind of weird and scary because now there can be unestablished groups that advocate for violence, but because the media doesn't talk about them, they're allowed to engage in violent activity. Facebook has gone, they've jumped the shark and then some. Let's check out their policies. So moving on from these stories, I've pulled up the actual, as you can see, facebook.com/community-standards/credible violence. Here we can see in the introduction, there is 1, violence and criminal behavior. The first section deals with violence and incitement. They say, we aim to prevent potential offline harm that may be related to content on Facebook. While we understand that people commonly express disdain or disagreement by threatening or calling for violence in non-serious ways, we remove language that incites or facilitates serious violence. We remove content, disable accounts, and work with law enforcement when we believe there is a genuine risk of physical harm or direct threats to public safety. We also tried to consider the language and context in order to distinguish casual statements from content that constitutes a credible threat to public or personal safety. In determining whether a threat is credible, we may also consider additional information like a person's public visibility and vulnerability. And here we can see Paul Joseph Watson is correct. They actually do say that you can incite violence and call for death if the target is covered in the dangerous individuals and organizations policy, or is described as having carried out violent crimes or sexual offenses wherein criminal predator status has been established by media reports. What's interesting here is the media report section. This is where we can see Paul is correct, but on a technicality. Looking at the rules on its surface, we can see that Paul does not fall into their second category, the second category here, dangerous individuals and organizations. Based on the criteria presented here, Paul does not fall into this policy. However, due to public statements made by Facebook, he does. So here's the technicality. They say, when it's established by media reports, Facebook said he falls into this category to the press. So the media has now established Paul is a dangerous individual, and thus, he's right. The bigger issue here, though, when actually looking at the rules, they say that you are allowed to incite violence and death against Antifa, the Proud Boys, or any other group. And to me, this is insane. We should not be advocating violence at all. We should absolutely get rid of all threats of violence and not allow it for any extra criteria. This is mind-blowing stuff. Check this out. In their policy rationale, they say, in an effort to prevent and disrupt real-world harm, we do not allow any organizations or individuals that proclaim a violent mission or are engaged in violence from having a presence on Facebook. This includes organizations or individuals involved in the following: terrorist activity, organized hate, mass or serial murder, human trafficking, organized violence, or criminal activity. They say, we also remove content that expresses support or praise for groups, leaders, or individuals involved in these activities. Based on all of these, it would seem that Paul Joseph Watson wouldn't really fall into any of these categories, although you could argue he falls into the hate organizations. But they say this: a hate organization is defined as any association of 3 or more people that is organized under a name, sign, or symbol that has an ideology, statement, or physical actions that attack individuals based on characteristics including race, religious affiliation, nationality, ethnicity, gender, sex, sexual orientation, serious disease, or disability. Technically, then, you could claim that Paul Joseph Watson is critical of religious affiliation, and thus he is an individual associated with being biased against or hateful against a religious affiliation. He's not involved in any organization, though, but they do. So it's very, very confusing. But let's take a look at this. They say an ideology or physical actions that attack individuals based on nationality. Therefore, anyone who says anything disparaging about Americans would be banned. That's kind of weird, right? Because why would you ban someone for being critical of a country? What about Iran? What about Americans who are saying Iran just shot down our drone, therefore they're bad? Facebook can ban you for this. They haven't clarified their rules. They made the rules weirder and harder to understand and actually created a provision that allows you to incite violence. No less than 3 times in this do they say that you can incite violence. They say first, statements advocating violence, unless the individual is in their dangerous policy. They say aspirational or conditional statements to commit high severity violence, unless the target is in this group. So they say in every step of the way, you literally can incite violence. How Facebook has put together rules saying you can literally be violent on their platform is beyond me. But I kid you not, we're looking at it. I put the URL in these videos on purpose so you can see facebook.com. Further down, they actually say threats that lead to serious injury towards private individuals, minor public figures, vulnerable persons, or vulnerable groups where the threat is defined as any of the following. And once again, they can say in every circumstance, anything that is a call for violence has an exemption saying so long as this person in the media has been deemed to be a criminal or a predator, you're allowed to commit violence. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. This is why Antifa is banned. First, you could argue that Antifa doesn't target people based on these characteristics, but they do. Antifa targets nationality. They think America is fascist, but they don't overtly target nationality. However, they do target white people. They do say things about white people, and they do have a name, sign, and symbol. But let's say Facebook doesn't believe that the targeting of white people it qualifies, because we typically know how these things fall. Facebook doesn't believe that, white people can be racist, I guess, although they have taken action against feminists who have targeted men. So Facebook is probably going to be, balanced in how they approach this. But Antifa tends to target political affiliation. Antifa, although they are typically aligned with the identitarian left, they're not big on the yelling about white people. So let's do this. First, Antifa in Portland, flying their banner, flying their symbols and their flags, have used racial slurs against black people. Well, there you go. The media has established this. But let's say that these are edge cases pertaining to Antifa, and Antifa overtly targets conservatives and they aren't protected. Fine. They say that Antifa would qualify as a criminal organization. Any association of 3 or more people that is united under a name, color, hand gesture, recognized indicia that has engaged in or threatens to engage in criminal activity, including but not limited to, bada bing, bada boom, assault. As we know, many people on Twitter have openly defended Antifa, flown the Antifa symbol, have Antifa organized pages, and say, punch a Nazi, advocating for assault and engaging in assault. From there, we can see that is established in the media and will now, for all Antifa on Facebook, they will fall into this group. For one, DHS and the FBI has said Antifa are terrorists. They said they engage in domestic terrorist violence. They engage in assault, they advocate assault, and therefore, plain and simple, they're a criminal organization. However, do any of us really believe that Facebook will take action against Antifa? I think for the most part, no. Not even anti-fascists think Facebook will take action against them. They will take action against the Proud Boys, though. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Moving forward, in the new guidelines, we can see that you can't promote or publicize crime. It's really weird. In this section, there are no exemptions. They say, do not post content depicting, admitting, or promoting acts of physical harm committed against people. Acts of physical harm committed against animals, except in the cases of hunting, fishing, etc. The point is, they say you can't post content depicting, admitting, or promoting these things, but you can call for them. Is that promoting? This is where it gets confused. If someone says, go do X, is that promoting, an act of crime? I don't know. So I don't quite understand what Facebook is trying to say, except it is really, really, really weird that they literally have a provision that says, you can't do this unless. What do you mean unless? No matter who you call for violence against, it is a crime. You could call for crime against avowed far-right fringe extremists, and you are still committing a crime. You're not allowed to do that in the United States. The last one we have is coordinating harm, which iterates basically the same thing. Do not post statements of intent, calls to action, or advocating acts of physical harm committed against people. But you just said in the first policy that you can. So no, I have no idea what you want, Facebook. Now, many of you may be wondering why all this is happening. And I have this story here which kind of breaks it down. I'm not going to read through the whole thing, but just to give you an example. The Guardian writes, Facebook ban on white nationalism is too narrow, say auditors. See, auditors were upset that people who were criticizing white nationalism would still be banned, that Facebook needed to take into consideration the symbols. Therefore, Facebook decided to broaden their policies. I was also critical of Facebook because when Facebook said they were going to ban white nationalism, I said, what about any other ethno-nationalism or any other ethnic nationalist ideology? Why just white people? Why not, Asian ethno-nationalism? And so this is the point. Facebook is trying to say, okay, fine. All racial groups, like all racial nationalist groups, all ethno-nationalist groups, you can't do it. Instead, all they really did was make things worse. They wanted to ban extremists, so they targeted Paul Joseph Watson, Laura Loomer, Milo Yiannopoulos, etc. People who are not avowed white nationalists and who have been very critical of it, but have been associated in the media. And therein lies the big problem. Far-left media can lie, as they do about many people, and then Facebook says, you know what? You are free to commit a crime against these people. The law doesn't think so, but is Facebook now going to leave up illegal content? That to me is crazy. I am not a free speech absolutist, by no means. I believe there are reasonable limits to speech. The Supreme Court has found this to be so. Incitement to violence, not free speech. I agree. Bad opinions, free speech. It's hard to know exactly where to draw the line, but for the most part, I believe that there are limits. Interestingly, on social media, I believe that these platforms can take action based on certain criteria. Like, if you post a death threat against someone or incite violence, I believe they should remove that. Most people do. Or if you dox someone. Even though doxing, I believe, is protected speech. You are allowed to go outside and publish someone's name and address, especially if it's in like the phone book or something. A lot of this information is already publicly available, but these platforms will remove that. It gets really weird then. When Facebook says we will delete legal content and allow illegal content, why is Facebook determining what is acceptable in terms of the law? That's where things kind of break down and are very, very strange. Now, to give you an example of why Antifa would be banned under this provision, I have this story. It's recent. Antifa members allegedly dox and follow library protest mom with baseball bat. In Chicago, following someone with a weapon would be considered assault. Assault is putting someone in reasonable fear of harm. Therefore, by one standard, we've got assault. We've got Antifa beating up Andy No. Boom, there it is. In Portland, Antifa beat up Andy No. They are now a criminal organization, thus should be banned from Facebook. More importantly, you are allowed to incite death? What? That should not be allowed. Do not incite death. Do not commit crimes. Do not threaten anyone with violence, even if they do fly the Antifa flag. That is absurd. Plain and simple. But here we can see that there it is. Facebook's policies make no sense and are going to dramatically escalate the culture war. So I have to wonder, is Facebook's idea that if a bunch of regular people send death threats to Antifa and the Proud Boys, it'll get them to stop? But then if a group of people form like the Anti-Proud Boys, where they incite violence, which is allowed under Facebook's rules, they then become a criminal organization inciting hate. And does Facebook ban them as well? So you're saying individuals have a right to incite violence against people? None of this makes sense. It's really confusing and kind of scary that Facebook would even consider allowing a caveat for breaking the law. But I'll end with a few interesting points that I think are important and funny because you know what, Facebook, who cares? Here's a story from the Next Web. Mark Zuckerberg's new rules for the internet happen to benefit Facebook. Again, I'm not going to read through this whole thing, but the story basically breaks down how regulation is upon us. These companies are at risk. And in response, let me zoom in a little bit. In response to Elizabeth Warren's call to break up Facebook, they note, Facebook responded to Elizabeth Warren's calls to break up big tech by removing her ads from the platform, albeit briefly. Here's the thing. I think that was a shot across the bow. That was a warning shot to Elizabeth Warren. You want to use our platform to promote your campaign? We will delete you if you threaten us. Now, they say it was a mistake, but think about what that means to a politician. Elizabeth Warren and many other politicians rely on the reach of Facebook because Facebook is monopolizing the digital space. So is Google. Facebook just said to Elizabeth Warren, we will remove you from one of the biggest digital platforms if you dare threaten us. That's what it sounds like to me. Now, of course, it was just a mistake. But why would they remove Elizabeth Warren's ads? It's not like it's hate speech. It's not like it violates any of the guidelines. She's just a Democrat pushing for, like, health care. You don't have to agree with her or like her or trust her, but she's certainly not extreme in any capacity. This is Facebook telling politicians, we can end you. It's Facebook saying we condone certain violence. They actually will condone violence, so long as it's in their list or the media says so. And then I've got a few other things that I think are funny. In this story from Gizmodo, another example of Facebook's insane reach and why we need regulation, not just for Facebook, is that Mark Zuckerberg used a software bit to track memes claiming that he was an alien. Check this out. Citing former employees in internal documents, Bloomberg reported that Storm Chaser had been used by Facebook employees since 2016 to track viral content involving everything from delete Facebook campaigns to claims that Zuckerberg is an alien. And then they say, parentheses, big if true. Listen, Mark Zuckerberg's not an alien, okay? It's just people making fun of him. But why would they have a program to track a meme claiming he's an alien? The point I made the other day when I talked about this story specifically was that as an employee of Facebook, do you think they're sitting there going, how dare someone insult my boss, Mark Zuckerberg? I want to track these memes. Or do you think the Facebook employees would laugh and go, Zuckerberg is an alien? People tend not to speak kindly of their bosses. Like, it's a trope that they'll be critical of their bosses, especially Zuckerberg. It sounds to me like Zuckerberg wanted them to track these memes. The point is whether or not Zuckerberg actually cared. They are willing to use powerful tools to track the public opinion of themselves on their own platform. And while that makes sense, like, of course, companies do market research to see how people think about them, think about the ramifications of how Facebook can track public sentiment on any issue and how they can manipulate public discourse by getting rid of Elizabeth Warren to then change what people are talking about. One of the issues may be Elizabeth Warren talks about breaking up big tech, so they say get rid of her. That way nobody talks about it ever again. But you know what? Here's one final thought on the matter. Steve Wozniak seems to be a pretty good dude, co-founder of Apple. You know what he said recently, the other day? Get off Facebook. And I can't blame him. I don't really use Facebook much at all anymore. I use it kind of for Messenger, but I'm starting to use other Messenger apps, and I don't really care. Facebook has lost all value to me a long time ago, and they're bleeding American users. They're adding developing nation users, people who are just now getting access to mobile phones and internet. These are not valuable users for Facebook, and this spells a bad future for Facebook. Advertisers want access to people with disposable income. People in developing nations who just got a cell phone, they don't really qualify. And so what ends up happening? Facebook is losing its core user base. Wealthy or middle-class Americans, Americans with disposable income, Americans in general who can spend stuff when the advertisers ask them to. Facebook is in trouble and they're panicking. So they're tracking sentiment, they're shutting down politicians, and for whatever reason, I have no idea why, allowing people to break the law. Maybe they needed some controversy, maybe they can't avoid it, I have no idea. But I'll end by saying this. While Paul's story may be a bit hyperbolic, he's not wrong. They really do have this provision saying you can incite violence and death against him. Why? I have no idea. And it's really creepy. And that means people are going to keep doing it. They already are. Paul posts the threats against him in this story. They say crazy things. I can only imagine it will get worse. And now you're going to have people on the right calling for violence against Antifa, and that's allowed too? I don't even know anymore. I'll leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. We'll keep the conversation going. You can follow me on Minds, minds.com/Timcast, because I'm actually using Messenger there for the most part. It's hard. I can't respond to everybody, but Facebook, bad. Mine's good. Or at least better. Nobody's perfect. I will have more segments coming up. YouTube.com/TimcastNews starting at 6 p.m. So again, thanks for hanging out, and I will see you all in the next segment.